Fires back into it in Chester. Here's El Senior. Yes!
The center back, Jacob Glesnes.
He's going for it. Oh, my God! What a goal! And that will do it! One of the best comebacks in recent years. 3 unanswered by the Union. And they go into the Gold Cup break, winning it 3-2.
Hello and welcome to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd, and this is the second time I think we've done this season, live on Twitter Spaces. Hopefully we get a lot more participants than we had the last episode. Starting this episode a little bit later at night, midweek. I forget, I think 7 p.m., and I don't even remember like the day that I did the podcast last. But again, live on Twitter Spaces, and for you guys that are live here on Twitter Spaces now, if you guys don't stay for the whole thing, that's great and everything. That's why we release this as a podcast, so you can catch up on everything that you may or may not have missed. But with that said, I think, Ricky, you are in here. We're starting to get some people in here. So, Ricky, what are your thoughts on the Union's first 14 games played?
I kind of expected us to be honestly doing a little bit better at this point because unlike New York City, Seattle, and let's say Montreal, who's looked pretty good this season, like we didn't actually have to worry about the international game this year. And until May, there wasn't as many, hard parts of our schedules because, like, we were getting New York on short rest for them. We got Montreal on short rest for them. Until you get into May and you have, we're flying to Nashville, we're flying to LA, and then you add that Open Cup game. There wasn't a lot of Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, and then May was just kind of like, oh, here's everything. So I honestly thought this is about where we'd be, and I know in the Todd in the group and a group chat was talking about like, really would people have thought we were doing this good? And I felt, and I kind of felt this coming into the season that just because of how everything happened last year, there are teams that come off of a year where everything goes great, but then you just don't get over the hump at the end of the season where they hit their like high water mark, so to speak. But I felt like the Union, you return most of the team, unlike the year before where you lose a bunch of players because of the Shield. You bring it back pretty much everybody. And I as a high school volleyball player, a lot of the problems we had when we'd go into like state playoffs, big games, is you don't go out with your best game. And the Union last year just didn't even have the chance to go out with their best game. And I felt like that's one of those things where if you don't have the chance and everybody's coming back the next year, say you've got a bunch of like younger, players in high school or college sports, or like with the Union where everybody's back, and it's like essentially we're running it back. And I felt coming into the season, Gazdag was going to have, a rest for the first time. He's not going to be playing 60 games, in a year span. He's had 2-3 months. And the David Goss theorem, where the second-year player does a lot better just because they're used to the physicality of the league. They're used to what's expected of them. And I saw a lot of that coming into the season. And honestly, the thing that I thought was going to really like put the Union over the edge was instead of working in the younger players like he started to towards the end of last year, he would have had more. Jim Curtin would have had more confidence in them this year. That's the one thing that I've really been surprised by, because you've noticed it with all of the youth players over the years. Is the first year they're on the big team, it takes him a few months for him to like really feel comfortable with him. You saw it with Paxton and Jack and all these players last year. You saw it with like even, Brendan Aronson, where it took a while, but like once he's in the team, he's in the team. Once a player like you look at the years before, Mark McKenzie, like Jack Elliott, even like once they were in the team, and they were only out of it if they were injured or whatever. I think that's the one big thing that is confusing to me, is that all those players just haven't been given the minutes. Like Jack's getting the most minutes, of those players except for Nathan Harriel, but that's just a completely different conversation because, your right back is just not doing well and he gets benched, That's a bit different than Paxton Aaronson's behind one of the best number 10s in the league currently. Jack McGlynn's behind Leon Flock, who Jim Curtin would probably start if he broke his leg tomorrow. And I think that's where I've kind of been at this season.
Yeah, but I guess the question becomes like, we've seen the same starting 11 for majority of the season. So, I mean, who do you take out of that 11? I mean, fans want Jack McGlynn, they want Quinn Sullivan, they want Paxton Aronson playing more. And the one thing Jim Curtin did do is he played the players that fans have been complaining about not getting enough game time in the U.S. Open Cup. And I don't want to make this into a big, should Jim Curtin have rested players in the LAFC game and went for it in the U.S. Open Cup? I feel like we're all past that now. But I don't know. Maybe you guys want to have that conversation here on Twitter. We can have that if that's what you guys want. But Leon Flock offers so much defensively. And yeah, he might not put up the offensive numbers that fans want to see, but I know Rich says it all the time on Twitter. It's like the little things that Leon Flock does that don't show up on the stat sheet with goals, with assists. He's pressuring the ball. He's forcing a turnover. He's getting an interception, which leads to the Union going on to an attack. And I feel like so many fans, just ignore that and everything. It's like, oh, Leon Flock just he's too slow. He never shoots the ball. But I feel like, at least for right now, where we don't really need the offensive productivity from Leon Flock because we're getting that from Kai Wagner. Now, if Kai Wagner does get sold here in the summertime, then that's a conversation we can definitely have because Jim Curtin said plenty of times the last couple of weeks that, Matt Real, if Kai is sold, he feels confident that Matt can go ahead and take the step at left back. That's the next choice. And I know we've seen very little of Matt Real the last couple of years, but I keep going back to that game against LAFC in 2020, right before the COVID shut down the league. Like, I know it's such a long time ago, but he did such a good job shutting down Carlos Vela in that game. And I know that game was super late at night, so how many fans, stayed up for that game? How many fans remember what happened in that game? But, yeah, he did a good job defensively, and you've seen Jim Curtin bring on Matt Real sometimes as a center mid and everything to kind of solidify things defensively. But, Matt Real does have that little bit of aggressive offensive spark, I feel like, too. He has pace on him and everything. And I just don't see who you take out of this lineup to get Jack McGlynn in here. And I've said it plenty of times on the podcast where I don't think Jack McGlynn fits into the 4-4-2 diamond. You've got to sit him next to somebody who's going to do the defensive work because Jack's not fast enough to do the defensive work. He's not good enough in the attack. If you want him to spray balls around, then I think that's perfect for Jack McGlynn. But Jim Curtin's not going to go out of his way and change the formation up to accommodate Jack McGlynn. Now, I know last year they switched to the 4-3-2-1 because they had no strikers on the roster, so they had to change things up that way. But, I'm not sure how Jack McGlynn gets into this lineup. And I know some fans are like, well, if you put Leon Flock as a left back, you can put Quinn Sullivan on the left side of the diamond. But here's the thing I think a lot of us forget is Quinn Sullivan was a winger coming up out of the academy, just like Jack DeVries. And so the opportunities have been limited. And the reason you give Quinn Sullivan a contract is because he's too talented. You don't want to lose that. And so, eventually you're going to sell Quinn Sullivan, but it's like, okay, well, I'd rather have this guy on the team than sell him. So Paxton Aronson, I feel like is the only player other than Nate Harriel out of all the homegrowns currently that fits this formation. But like you said, Ricky, I mean, Daniel Gazdag is putting up MVP numbers, and it's surprising to me that all of us on Union Twitter missed the news that Daniel Gazdag got COVID. I think I saw pictures today that he posted on Instagram that he was training with the Hungarian national team. So I guess he's been cleared, good to go. And if you guys remember when Casper got COVID, it took him a while to get back in his form and everything. And some can argue that he never got back to what he was prior to getting COVID. And so how will Daniel Gazdag be affected from getting COVID? I guess we'll see. But at the same time, too, if his levels aren't there, then, Paxton Aaronson's beating on the door to get his opportunity. And a lot of you guys have requested to speak on Twitter Spaces, and I've approved a whole bunch of you. Like I said, if you guys want to get on here, if you guys are on the phone, go ahead and just request that speak option, and I'll go ahead and let you guys talk. But Doc from Philly 17 was the first person that asked to speak and everything. So, Doc, how you doing? Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm just showing love. The Union play on PHL 17. So I want to write more stories and more articles about the Philadelphia Union. So just me learning more. I really want to ask. I thought the Union was doing pretty good this year after where they came from. Last year, they kind of to me, overachieved. And now this year, I feel like they're on pace. I feel like the only team to beat, we'll see, is if they get back to the conference finals, if New York is there and get a rematch. But listen to what you guys saying, don't look too happy. So I just want to understand more why.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm definitely happy with the way that the Union are playing. I mean, 6 wins, 7 draws, 1 loss. I mean, they're the only team in MLS that's lost 1 game, and everybody else has lost 3 or more. And so, I mean, the Union, they're always going to be a team that's good defensively. I think the one thing that fans are upset about is you go ahead and you look at all the soccer terms and everything. The Union, their XG, they're creating so many chances, but they're just not finishing. And I think part of that reason is because their number 1 player, their highest signing, Mikael Uhre, that they got from Brøndby in Denmark, he hasn't been healthy, he hasn't been fit. And there's a player who has a proven goal-scoring record over in Europe, and some of the chances that the Union are creating, Corey Burke, Sergio Santos, they missed a lot of chances. And you got to imagine somebody like Mikael Uhre, who's a proven goal scorer, who's played in the highest competitions that you can play in Europe, bringing in that kind of talent in MLS, you feel like he'll definitely finish off some of those chances. And going back to a rematch between New York City and Philadelphia Union, I think for New York City fans, I think they're sweating a little bit because it's looking more and more likely that they're going to lose their best player in Tati Castellanos. He'll be sold more than likely to Europe this summer, just like Kai Wagner. It's to be expected. Both of them are being linked to Leeds United in the Premier League. And that would be interesting for Union fans to go ahead and cheer for Tati Castellanos when they've given him nothing but hate when he comes to Subaru Park. And Union fans are going to feel like they need to cheer for Leeds United because they just recently signed Brenden Aaronson. If they go out and sign yet again another Philadelphia Union player in Kai Wagner, that gives Union fans even more reason to pay attention to what Leeds United are doing with 2 former players. And then you throw in Jack Harrison, who used to play in MLS with New York City. Tati Castellanos, like I said, plays for New York City, and he's been rumored to go to New York City. Jesse Marsch, the head coach of Leeds United, used to coach New York Red Bulls, is one of Jim Curtin's best friends, one of his mentors. And so, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for Union fans, but not only Union fans, but MLS fans to pay close enough attention to Leeds United next season if both of those players do wind up in England playing for Leeds. But it's so surprising just to see, I was mentioning the Eastern Conference, the 7 teams, only Inter Miami and Orlando City have scored less goals than the Union have in the league. And you go ahead and look. I mean, it's 14 games in, and Jim Curtin always talks about, you don't get a clear picture of who's going to be in the playoffs until after 10, 11 games in. And I mean, as things stand right now in the Eastern Conference, it's New York City, the Philadelphia Union, Montreal, New York Red Bulls, Orlando City, FC Cincinnati, and Inter Miami. But Charlotte, who just recently fired their head coach, they've been pushing above their weight, I feel like most MLS fans will say, and they're right there too. And it'll be interesting to see what Charlotte has to offer now that they've fired their coach. They bring in a new manager. Charlotte, like I said, are punching above the weight with 5 wins, 1 draw, 8 losses. But I don't know. I would definitely love to hear what other Philadelphia Union fans have to say. Mike, I think you were the next one that requested to speak. So, Mike, what are your thoughts after 14 games played for the Union?
Yeah, my thoughts. I'm sorry.
Both of you guys.
No, go ahead, Mike. It's cool. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mike. But yeah, the one point I'd like to piggyback on is kind of, I think Uhre this year is going to be like Gazdag of last year. I agreed with you completely of what you kept saying last season, that you need to give Gazdag time, and I think the same thing is the same with Ure. Is you need to give him time, especially all the mileage he also had in his legs. Same with Gazdag. So far, it is kind of not doom and gloom, but it's positive. But a lot of times, I feel like everybody just knows that all those ties, a lot of them could have been wins. We gave up. I think most of them. I think other than one, we were down. We gave up most of those leads, so it's really rough in that we just see the prospects even being better. But being second place right now, being comfortable, I just really want like the clearest path to the Cup. The Open Cup and the Supporter Shield are all second and third compared to the MLS Cup, and I think we're in good shape for that.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead to you, Mike Thomas, now. Long time no see. I feel like, you say apparently that you don't read what's going on Twitter, but I feel like that's a lie because Mike's always out there lurking. How you doing, man?
Hey, I read it. I turned off my notifications, so I'm out of the loop sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the best for my mental health. But just going sort of back to Doc's point of like, hey, they're in a great position point wise. They've only lost one game. Why are we upset? And I mean, I've been thinking about it lately, and I think it ultimately comes down to is, yeah, the point total's where you want it at, but they got there very unconventionally, maybe picking up points you wouldn't have expected them to have, and then dropping points that you would have expected them to have, right? So, that there's just this overarching sense. It's like, yeah, they're in a great spot, but they could be even in a greater spot. And I mean, when I go back and look on it, yeah, there's been a lack of goals. And ultimately what that comes down to is they haven't had their best striker pairing really with any substantial time together yet. So, as soon as Ua and Carranza can get on the field together, I think, I mean, knock on wood, but hopefully that's the silver bullet we're sort of looking for to bring everything together. Now, what that looks like with Kai potentially not there, I guess we'll see. But I don't know, just sort of have had that in the back of my mind a lot.
For sure. Rich, you next, I think, and then we'll go to Dan. So, Rich, 14 games in, what are your thoughts with the Union season so far?
Well, I mean, I share a lot of the same thoughts as everyone else. The thing is, as Union fans, we're not used to this position. We're not used to being consistently considered among one of the best teams in the league. So we really just don't know how to act. So, and the fact of the matter is, a lot of those ties, we're right there. There were big wins we could have had, and we didn't get to this point. So, it left a little bit of a bitter taste in our mouth. But this break, I think, has been really good to kind of get the long view and, kind of assess where we are. And I think, you don't see too many people being too negative. I think most people have perspective. The thing I want to talk about with the younger players is, it is important, I guess, to develop these guys, but the point is winning a cup. That's the whole point. So, we want to put ourselves in the best position come playoff time. We want to have home games. Yes, we want to develop youth, but we just have better players in our starting 11 than any of our reserves. So just kind of rotating guys in just to get them minutes, it hurts our team short term. So, and Jim just doesn't seem like he wants to do that, especially since this year we don't have a crowded schedule. So there's really, I don't think it would have been, thinking about it, it wouldn't have really been reasonable to expect him to do a lot of rotation because he doesn't like to do it anyway. So, yeah. And hey, Doc, just so you know, this is just kind of how we are. We argue when things are going bad, and we argue when things are going good. And it's not that we're unhappy. It's just that we like to talk about the Union, and criticisms or concerns just kind of generates more traffic. Just kind of how it goes.
For sure, you're definitely right in that regard. Dan, we'll go to you next. I mean, what are your thoughts 14 games in? I think, we're seeing a pattern of fans, happy with the Union. But like Rich said, I mean, you go back to the LAFC game where they should have won that game. The game against Nashville, they should have won that. And both goals they gave up were in the 80th plus minute. I mean, you expect when you get into that closing time that the Union are going to see out games. And they gave up a penalty in one, and actually both games were a penalty, right? So, disappointing. Actually, no, one penalty, and then the LAFC goal, a game I think was a late goal. So, disappointing off of a corner kick, I believe it was. But I mean, in second place in the East, I mean, it's not terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, second place in the East, everybody's happy with it, right? So we've dropped points, we've picked up points. I think to Doc's point, when he comes in here kind of new to it, and he's like, everybody doesn't seem all that happy. I think it has less to do with the way we've won or dropped points than it does with the style of play that we're playing, right? So a lot of people already know, Doc, you said you're new to soccer. So a lot of a soccer team is their identity and the way they play, right? So think of it like a 3-4 defense or a 4-3 defense in football, right? People a lot of times are sold to a certain style of play. So for the last 10 years in America's always late to tactics. We were told that the best way to play was a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1. It was tiki-taka. It was possession-based. It was the best offenses keep the ball so the other team, or the best defenses keep the ball so the other team can't score, right? So the previous general manager, Ernie Stewart, reshaped the team to play with like this, and Jim Curtin, went along and had his tactics to go with that. So then we get a new manager who's a little general manager, Ernst Tanner, who's a little restrained by the cap and the, I'm not trying to say cheap, but the less than willingness to spend. Yeah. Sorry, I was echoing there. So now drastically in the last 2 years, the style of play has completely changed. And what we were used to seeing, or what we were being told that the giants of the game played, like a Barcelona or a Man City or a Bayern Munich, was that this possession-based soccer is how you win. And we've gone this year and completely thrown it out the window. We are fourth from the bottom in passes completed. We are, I think, bottom of crosses completed. It's literally, who cares if you pass the ball and keep possession? It's press, win the ball, play direct, which we were admonished for as Americans for playing that way back in the 90s, right? And the aughts. And just try to get yourself in a position to score as quickly as possible. And we can see that with the expected goals that we've put up, but we don't see it with the goals. So I think there's a lot of just underlying notions in soccer, especially American soccer and MLS, and people expect a certain way. And I think this change has really thrown some people off. So when it's successful, it's like, look at these guys, they're playing quote unquote the Red Bull style, right? Europe, sorry everybody. And then when it goes bad, it's like, what are these guys doing? So I think that has a lot to do with it. As far as where we're at, it's awesome. We're second in the East. I mean, we'll see what happens the rest of the way. I got faith in Kurt. So that's all. I figured I'd take it in a different direction.
I think that's a pretty astute point, and I think it actually makes a lot of sense because with the new style, often the whole game you're sitting there watching our team absorb pressure, and it's a tense way to win games. But we've been doing it, I think there's a lot to that, what Dan just said.
Yeah, it is. And, you'll see fans on social media complain, oh, well, the Union, the possession.
Yeah, and I think it's really going to be interesting if Wagner is sold, which I think is 95% chance. How much of those tactics do change? Do we have somebody kind of ready to boost in? Are we going to give the reins to Matt? What's going to happen there, and how much of that is going to not only change our defense ability, pushing up from a defense as Wagner's very good at, but also the tactics in general, I think is going to be interesting.
I personally don't think they change at all. I think you see Real replace Wagner in a like-for-like, at least somewhat defensively, and ability to get up and down that wing. I think Flock brings way too much to the system. His pressing and the amount of pressures he creates and the amount of ground he covers for him to even consider taking him off or out of that midfield. I just think it's a like-for-like, and we swim with it, or hopefully, and not sink with it. That's what I think. I mean, there's a million opinions out there, but I think they're like-for-like, and I don't know if Matt Real resigns if he wasn't given a verbal that he would have a chance to compete for the starting position once Wagner was sold. I think they couldn't get the valuation for Wagner they wanted earlier due to COVID, and that's why Real stuck around. But that's just my opinion. I don't have any inside info.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll get to that point about the Union not getting the value they wanted for Wagner. Tom Bogert said on one of the MLS soccer podcasts, there's a million of them, that the Union apparently turned down $6 to $8 million from either Brentford or Fulham for Kai Wagner. And, I was talking to some people about that. I'm like, man, if that's true, I feel like the Union would 100% accept that for Kai Wagner, drive him straight to the locker room because, it's a ton of money. I mean, the most money we would get up front for a player, potentially $8 million. I don't think there would be add-ons, but, I think with the Union, if they did in fact turn that down, I don't see why Tom would be lying about that. I feel like then that just means that Kai Wagner could potentially go for 10 plus million. I mean, I don't see why not. And, as we were talking about Kai Wagner tonight, real quick, I want to go back to your point, Dan, about Leon Flock. You can't replace him in the system. He leads all MLS players in total pressures with 347. I mean, I've said it before in the past where he's the closest thing to Brendan Aronson since Brendan's been here in terms of pressing and everything. So you take out Leon Flock, who's number one, not only just in the Union, but all MLS, your press is going to look a lot different. And I know, you get a lot of pressures from Julian Kranza. Daniel Gazag's learned the system. He's pressing more. But, a lot of it, as soon as the press doesn't work up top, Leon Flock's going to be right there in the midfield. And you take him out, everything is going to change so much. So I don't see Leon Flock getting taken out. And I know I've talked about Leon Flock potentially going to left back, but even if you move Leon Flock to left back, the whole system is going to change drastically if you did in fact do that. But I was thinking Kai Wagner, we all, I think, feel like Kai Wagner is definitely going to be sold sometime in the summertime. It's just a matter of to what team. Would you guys feel comfortable saying Kai Wagner is the best Union player to ever play for this team? Whoever wants to take that, go for it.
It's Andre Blake. Come on, let's not. You've been talking about this a lot, Todd. Andre Blake exists. End of question. Move on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different factors. If you want to go overall in terms of best player to ever step on to the pitch in a Union jersey, I think we're now getting to the point where that may even just be Andre Blake, where Andre was always like, well, you have to put in the longevity as well and the service to it. Barnetta obviously is there, Dochel, Wagner, but I think for the position, for the accolades, and honestly, I do think just in terms of pure ability, I agree with Ricky. It's Andre.
Whoever else wants to jump on, is Kai Wagner the best Union player? Go ahead. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's Andre Blake, like Ricky and Michael said. Both excellent players, but I don't know. I feel like left back, I've talked about it on the podcast before, where it's the hardest position in all of soccer, and to see Kai Wagner excel not only defensively but offensively, he's transformed our attack just so much on the left side of the field, where in years prior we had nothing on the left side of the field. It was always, we're going to attack down the right, and then as soon as Kai gets here and comfortable in MLS, in the Union system, Kai's been unbelievable. It's been a one-man show, I feel like, on the left side of the field.
I want to put my vote in for Kai too, just because I love Andre Blake. He's a fantastic goalie. Obviously, he's a great, he's great. However, you're rating him versus what an MLS goalkeeper, or even just a keeper in general. Now, when you put Kai Wagner compared to an MLS left back or any left back, and I just think the level of his play is so elevated compared to other MLS left backs. And Andre, there's a lot of good keepers in the league, great keepers in the league, or there's several anyway. There's very, very few people in the league that are at the level that Kai Wagner is. That's what I think. I don't know. It's so hard to say. I mean, they're both great players. When I watch Kai Wagner play, I think every single game, I think, oh my God, this guy is so good. Like he's only in like second gear and he's dominant, absolutely dominant. And I'm just so impressed with him every single game.
Yeah, I mean, some of these crosses, it's like, man, he'd have more than 5 assists if we could just finish some of those plays off.
It's not even the cross. I mean, yes, the crosses, of course. But when you watch him play defensively, it's almost like he completely shuts down that side of the field. Like there's just nothing doing over there. It's just so impressive. And he's able to do both, which you look at a young player like Harrell, who's a very good right back. He's not quite – there's a level there, difference between – Harrell's very skilled and good, but he's often chasing a play, and he's often like a little aggressive forward. Kai just does all that stuff automatically. Like he does it. He's basically like a perfect left back, in my opinion.
I agree. Mike Thomas, Dan, one of you guys, Dan?
Yeah, I think it depends how you frame the question, right? So if it's the best player that has the opportunity to leave and perform at a high level, in a European league, then yeah, I think that's clearly Wagner. If you look at it as the best player that impacted the Union, then I mean, I think you got Blake, obviously Letou, right? And then Wagner's probably top 4 or 5. So I think it's just a different perspective. But as far as can leave tomorrow and step into perhaps the Premier League, like people are saying, then yeah, Wagner at his position is the most skilled and competent. But again, like to Ricky's point, if we're looking at longevity and MLS wise and just what they brought everything around, then yeah, I would have to say it's probably Blake or Letou. And I know Letou is miles behind skill wise at his position, but just what he brought for so long to the team.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I actually, that's exactly what I was going to say, right? So it all depends on frame. If you're saying is he the most talented player we ever had, he's definitely in that conversation, maybe along with, depending on who you talk to, like Barnetta or Nogueira, right? But so from a pure talent standpoint, I think you have that argument. From a pure Union impact, the longevity comes into play, the overall stats come into play, and then that's where Letou and Blake, I think, would outwin him. So I don't want to turn this into like a how do you frame the Ring of Honor type debate type thing. But I think that's really what you're weighing, right? Like you could have, even if you're talking pure potential in Europe, I mean, Brendan Aronson has to be in that conversation too, right? But I don't think you necessarily put him in the Ring of Honor with only, 2 seasons worth of Union output, right? So, it's not the most direct question in the world.
Hey, Mike, I think you just reminded me of there was an article, I think earlier this season, that talked about the Union like 6-7 years ago. And it specifically in the article, it was either Bogert or one of those guys. And it specifically talked about a player coming from overseas join the Union, and like the team's practices, not like practice as in like the daily practice, but like how the team was ran essentially with like training and food and weight rooms and all this stuff, and how like none of that existed in the same way that like lower division European teams were ran at the time. This is like 7 years ago. And they talked about how they came in and were basically like, no, this needs to change. And I'm like 900% sure they were talking about Alejandro Bedoya in this article, because it was right around that time. It would have been like right when he joined the team. And basically whatever player this is joins the team and then forces the team to start being serious about being a team. And I think when you like look at a lot of those players that we had back then and how like, this was not like a serious outfit. in the same way that since, say, Ernie Stewart's been here. It's been a serious outfit. And, you know, the conversation earlier about like, oh, we're not really used to winning, but like I feel like at this point we should be. It's been about 6 years of a team that's in the top, you know, 5 or 6 teams making playoffs every year except for one in like the last 7 years. Like this is a really good outfit at this point. And you, like when you consider like some of those years we were throwing out Fabian Herbers as like a great bench option and sometimes a starter. And now you're just like, we're talking about like Kai being such an impressive player moving on after just coming from the 3rd division in Germany. And I think we've got to like look at this question in a like players like Bedoya even have been an incredible impact on this team. And we might not see it as much, but the professionalism in this team is like levels beyond what it used to be. And I think we got to look at a lot of those players and be like, yeah, you did a great job getting us to where we are, that we can have this conversation that we're having about like, oh, is Kai better? Is Andre better? And I just wanted to throw in a nice shout to Jack Elliott while we're having this conversation. I'm not saying he should be on this list, but he's like in that Bedoya next set of players that I'm like, oh yeah, you've had a great impact on this team. I'm not going to throw you on this list. And then while we're at it, we also like, let's not forget that Kleberson played for this team.
Well, yeah, but he didn't do anything with us. But yeah, I mean, it goes back to the pure like most talented player, most potential player, biggest impact player. I mean, we're all different brackets and obviously all in different eras of the league. I mean, we know MLS is so much different than it was 12 years ago. So, I mean, it's hard to measure. Yeah, look at the stat line, right? Latu's 50-50 on goals and assists. I mean, that's hard to argue from a pure statistics standpoint, right? But very different era of the league, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. And to your point there, Ricky, I mean, expectations slide. The goalposts are constantly moving. And I think in general, people have much higher expectations for this team than they ever had before, which I think is a good thing, right? In terms of just pushing the team forward. You know, expectations and the goalposts move not just like year to year, but like over the course of the season, or I mean, even over the course of the game, right? So like when people have a sour taste in their mouth after only drawing in Nashville, even though, you know, it was their opener and a road point against a tough team, right? Like those expectations shifted over the course of the game. And, you know, when we start tying a bunch of games in a row, that's why people get left with that weird taste in their mouth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for sure. And, you know, there's, I always go back to, you know, conversations that we all have. You know, I feel like everybody that's in here in Twitter Spaces are all interacting with each other on Twitter and having the same conversations. But, you know, the one conversation that's been pretty evident on Twitter is like, okay, well, Mikel, you know, he's been dealing with injuries. Sergio Santos, you know, he can't stay healthy. And then you have Corey Burke, who, in my opinion, has probably been the biggest disappointment of the season, where this is a guy, okay, you don't expect him to be a superstar or anything, but, you know, he has MLS experience. We've seen what he's done in the past, but, like, some of these chances that he's getting, I mean, he's not putting them in the back of the net, or not even just not scoring. Like, my biggest issue is, and maybe some of you guys feel the same way, is like, you know, after 10 minutes, like, he's not interested. He doesn't press and everything. He looks lost out there on the field and everything. And so I guess my question is, whoever wants to take it next is, you know, a lot of fans have said, okay, well, maybe this summer we need to go out and sign another striker. And I'm not really sure. You know, I know I said maybe a month or so ago on Twitter that needs to be on number one on Ernst's transfer list for the summer is a new striker. But yeah, and the more I thought about that, I don't think that's going to happen, because he convinced Jay Sugarman to go out there and spend over $1 million for Jose Riasco from Venezuela, where we know Jay doesn't like spending money. And so Ernst had to go out of his way to convince Jay, look, this guy's going to be a huge deal. He's young. He's one of the top prospects coming out of Venezuela. We know that he's not with the first team yet. He's playing limited minutes with U2 for whatever reason. Maybe he's not adjusting. I'm not really sure. Maybe you guys pay a little bit more attention to Union 2 than I do, but I don't think we've seen a reasoning coming out why he's not playing as much games as us fans would have hoped. But, you have technically 5 strikers on this roster, and you don't bring in a new striker unless you know you're going to move somebody in the summertime. Sergio Santos, I guess you could potentially move, but I feel like he brings something to this team that the other strikers don't have, and that's speed. Corey Burke, he has 0 value, so unless you're going to outright cut him, which I don't see that happening, it's hard for me to imagine that Ernst Tenner convinces Jay Sugarman to go in and bring in a 4th striker, Julian, Mikel, Jose, and now a potential 4th striker in the summertime. I really don't see that happening, but if you guys were Ernst Tenner, maybe you guys don't upgrade the roster. What would you guys do?
The striker reinforcement's already there. He's just not healthy yet. I think coming off this injury and up to full speed and pairing with Carranza, I think that's the obvious answer. I don't think there's anything in the outside market that, barring something insane, that makes us that much better, to be honest.
One player, I wish he was here to defend himself, but Billy, he was in my DMs a couple of weeks ago. He's like, "Oh, dude, we should have went out and traded for Jalcy Zardes from Columbus." And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. He's on a DP contract. Do the Union really want to have 2 unions on a DP deal? I don't really think that's what they want to do. But go ahead. Whoever wants to take that question next. Rich, Ricky, Michael.
Just going back to the Brighter Mike's point, the Euro is the answer. I agree with him completely. I think it's just kind of like I said, the Gazdag, we're just waiting for him to get in there. Like you were saying, the money they spent already also is the money that they spent with Euro as well. I don't think throwing it for another striker in the off season would be the best move. To me, the number one priority is just making sure we have Carranza as a permanent. I think that's really. I think Euro's talented enough. I think he's shown the glimpses that it's there. It's just has to get pieced together. It is a new league. You got to give him time. But once that's there, and with Carranza and Gazdag, that's a very deadly offense.
Go ahead, Ed. I saw you asked to speak. Ed, thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't want to I was going to try to do my own thing. I wasn't sure if you're going to tee me up here, but in terms of this, situation with the strikers, it's just, I think they're just in a tough spot, especially this stretch of games with Carranza gets a yellow card, Ua is hurt and then he's not hurt, Santos is not hurt and then he's hurt, and it kind of just shows you need 4 guys in a 2-striker system that are pretty reliable. And then when you get to the 4th guy and he's just okay, you're kind of we need something there. But it's also he's the 4th guy, and we probably weren't even really planning on having to rely on Corey Burke in general at all. But it just worked out this way. And then they've gotten, like we were saying before, they've gotten results and gotten draws, but it feels like it could have been more with the XG. They could have converted more. But it stinks to have to come down to the 4th striker, and we're not nitpicking him because he just hasn't been that great, but he probably weren't really expecting him to do a whole lot this year.
Well, I think it's pretty telling, right? Where you look, where Jim Curtin's not even starting Corey Burke, he's starting Paxton Aronson up top. If that doesn't tell you what Jim Curtin and coaching staff think of how Corey Burke's played as of late, then I don't know what that's going to tell you.
Oh, I don't think that's the case at all. I think he started Aronson there because depending on the way the game went, he had a striker that he could bring in off of the bench. I think starting Aronson gave him more options from a light bench than it would have once you start Corey. You're stuck. I would also like to add, as much as Corey gets the hate, or the dislike, or the complaints, which are all valid, Sergio's not exactly, outperforming his XG either. He's a guy that would have been a world-class striker if he could put the ball in the back of the net, right? So,
yeah, but doesn't Sergio have one of the highest assists?
Yeah, he's second on the team. Yeah, he's second on the team.
I think this is well and all good conversation. I think your hope would be. Am I echoing or is somebody else talking?
No, you're good.
Okay. And I think your hope would be that, Corey Burke was expected to be the fourth guy because I think Sergio brings something that your two expected starters, let's go with, don't really have in that way. Like, Ura clearly is fast, but he's not that's his thing, He's sort of got everything in a way that Corey Burke wishes he had anything right now. And I think this conversation is well good and all, but the thing is, we were talking earlier about he's not subbing on the kids and he's doing all this, but the problem is every game, Corey Burke's 60th minute, and then the one game after it, he said straight up was I made the subs that give us the best chance to win, and I just remember sitting there seeing that quote come across Twitter and just being if Corey Burke is the option on your bench that's giving you the best chance to win in a 2-2 game or a 1-1 game, then we need to have a conversation about, your best chance to win in that moment, because Corey Burke hasn't done anything since the second game of the season.
For sure.
That just tells you the kids aren't strikers. They're not goal scorers. They're midfielders.
That's true, but I think the other thing is, I think in a 4-striker system, you're right. You'd want everybody to be healthy, so you have 2 guys and 2 backups on the bench, right? And I think you would also hope in a 4-striker system that not everybody is injury prone, and your one guy doesn't get a yellow card every game because that's just how he plays. And I think they hoped that they would make it through a year and then they'd have a guy like Riasco. And the other thing is with Riasco, maybe you miss out on that needing an extra year for him to figure things out because he's already been here a year when he really gets his chance with the first team. Because I think they might have plans for him to, towards the end of the season, be more involved than he currently is. And the way Corey Burke is playing, it makes it very likely that he could be more involved. And I think
he has to get involved with 2 first before he can get involved with 1, right?
Yeah. I think...
Go ahead.
I honestly didn't really hear what was said, so if Todd wants to come in again.
Well, I think the thing about Jim is, there's a bit of a thing called Jim speak where he doesn't always say exactly what he means, but an important part of I'm making the substitution to give me the best chance of winning is also to give me the least chance of losing that tie game. So we've had a string of draws that could have easily been, they could have just been lost as easily. In years past, they may have been. So, you could say, okay, I'm going to take Leon out. I'm going to put Sullivan in for the attacking, for the purpose of offense. But that could very easily be a goal the other way because Leon's not there. So that's definitely playing in his mind too. He'd also like to preserve the point. So, he doesn't like to mess with what's working, defensively. He doesn't like to mess with what's working.
I get that to a certain extent, but the other thing is this is the same thing that happens every season where halfway through the season, he starts to actually use his bench. And then Alejandro Bedoya gets hurt for 3 weeks, misses the last game of the season. We end up playing the second week on the road in playoffs and lose at Atlanta, something like that. I'm not sure that's kind of what happened. And I feel like if we're watching these games and every game, 85th minute, Bedoya starts grabbing his legs and Leon Fox starts grabbing his legs and we're not subbing anybody out. We have this whole our youth academy is great and all these players should be starting and playing more. And I think with the whole conversation with Orlando is everybody was oh, why would we throw this game? It's we didn't throw the game. We still put a great lineup out there and we barely lost to a team that's basically did the same thing. And all that, the whole conversation around that, I was like, oh, we should be playing for the win here. It's like, we played for the win. We just also played, for other wins as well. We've got bigger fish to fry, but if we fried this fish, we'd all be okay with it, right?
Yeah. So let me ask this question to the group. In terms of the homegrown players, they obviously have they all have studs in front of them right now. The chances are very limited. The margins are very narrow for them. You go in and it's sink or swim, and that's your small chance to prove yourself. Outside of Nate Harriel, have any of them done that in any of the opportunities they have been given? I know we're limited, but that's just how it works, right? Aronson, Brendan had a very limited opportunity to prove himself in a real game time situation, and he took it. Nate, the same thing. Mackenzie, the same thing. That's the pattern that I see with the homegrown players. And honestly, outside of a few nice moments here and there, I'm not sure any of the other homegrowns have done anything remotely close enough to displace the guys in front of them and to prove to Jim that they're even worth rotating in to give the team a better chance for success.
And I think it's all because they're square pegs trying to jam into round holes. I don't even think it's necessarily a knock against these players, but they're and I say this all the time. We have a roster issue in that our bench they're not like for like, and they don't actually, two of the three don't really fit into the system that we play. So
yeah, pretty much all of them were built in that 4-3-3 or the
4-2-3-1.
4-2-3-1. That's how they all grew up. Like the whole academy played that system.
I feel like Quinn has the same problem that Fontana had, really. Like he just doesn't really have a spot.
Yeah, Quinn's a right winger. Jack was a right winger or a left winger. Like Matt Real is a left wing back. Jack McGlynn should be a left-sided midfielder, not in a 4-4-2. The only ones that have been fine are the center backs because that was the same center back system, and the right backs because same exact right back you're playing. Like Keegan Rosenberry was playing the same exact sort of right back position that our right backs are, that Nathan Harriel's playing. Like not much has changed if we're being completely honest.
Yeah. And to Mike's point about why hasn't anybody stepped in and taken over the spot? No one has, and that isn't necessarily all a bad thing because I think it just shows the depth of the team. I think in prior years there would be more of a loose string and okay, you can keep going. There's nobody really knocking at the door, but because they're getting the opportunities, not because no one's knocking at the door, but because of injuries or because of just rest time, and they aren't fully taking it. Like I think Quinn's had some great moments and Jack has had some great moments, but for the most part, they haven't like fully displaced. That's not all a bad thing, especially when you do consider, and I agree, they're not really in the best position like to do that because they're not in their true position.
Yeah, I think the only player that like of the homegrowns that I don't think we've, outside of like when Todd mentioned earlier, outside of when Matt Real was the starting left back against LA 2 years ago, he's never really had a great chance to actually play except for when Kai's been injured. Because when he comes on, he plays at left midfield. When he started, he's gotten one start, Kai comes back. And I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but like there's like every time Matt Real's gotten a start, it wasn't because of, oh, we're trying something here. It's because the like Todd says, one of your best players on the team hurt. One of your best players on the team, multiple yellow cards. We're playing in Mexico City on Wednesday, so we're going to bench everybody. Whereas I think like Jack McGlynn's started a bunch of games because like we weren't going to start Fontana at left midfield last year, which is hilarious because now we're like, oh, Jack McGlynn also doesn't fit the system. And then they were like, oh, he just gives us a lot more defensively. And then I was like, oh, Jack McGlynn doesn't give us basically anything defensively. Like, Jack McGlynn's running around trying to play defense, and it's just the most hilarious thing to watch.
Well, I mean, I think Matt Real, if you're looking for soft spots for potentially experimentation with these homegrown players, it comes down to, does Matt actually end up filling Kai's shoes, assuming Kai leaves, right? So if Matt is shown to be sort of soft along the lines of Mbaizo, and then it forces a scenario where their best option is to move Leon to left back or something like that, which I'm not even sure that Jim would want to do that. I don't know. But then maybe that opens up the opportunity to start McGlynn or Aronson on that left side there.
I do think it's the sort of thing with that is where they've talked about Leon playing there, but Leon doesn't. Every conversation that you hear about Leon is not only does he not want to play left back, he doesn't want to play as the 6, which is kind of confusing because he's not a great 8, if we're being completely honest. But that's just because,
he's a good 8. He's just not a good attacking 8.
Yeah, and this was the conversation. Like, after one of the games, they were talking about talking to Leon, and basically there was a conversation Leon had with whoever was doing the broadcast. I think it was the FS1 game against Portland, where they were talking about how in the offense Leon is supposed to be the defensive 8 and Bedoya is supposed to be the attacking 8, which is technically correct, but also not saying literally anything about what the two players do, because Bedoya is also a really defensive 8, if we're being completely honest. And I think, like I said, like, Matt Real is probably a left wing back. He's not really a left back. That's why they play him more in left midfield. You're gonna have a player playing left back that isn't really a left back, is what's gonna happen, unless you buy a left back.
No, what's going to happen is Harriel is going to be our left back, and Mbaizo is going to be our right back. That's probably, honestly, how it all shakes out. I think that's the most likely scenario for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's a good point, because, I mean, Harriel, like, we didn't know much about him aside from, spot duty last year, and then, the kid winds up on the left-hand side in the Eastern Conference Final and damn near hit the game winner on that head ball, and just had a phenomenal game.
Yeah, and he was the backup left back in practices last year because Matt Real wasn't with the team. Take that for what you will.
I think the thing with Leon Flock is, I think having Kai on his side really frees him up to roam as he will and chase the ball down and really be like a real dog out there. That's why I don't really. People say they see him as a 6. I'm sure he can play it, but I think the best attribute of him is his like determination and his doggedness to chase stuff down. As a 6, I don't like that. That pulls him way out of position. It seems very exploitable. I think, I always hear that, and I always think, I don't know. I don't see a 6 from him. I see just what he is what he is. And I could see him playing left back as well, but I don't think that's going to happen.
I just think it goes back to maybe we should just finally have the conversation about a 3-back system of some sort. Because if you're going to play Leon or Matt Real at left back, you might as well make it a left wing back, and then you can start Jack beside like Bedoya and Martinez in a 3-man midfield. It all makes a lot of sense. Stuart Finley is pretty okay at playing center back, and you can still have 2 forwards. One of them could be Gazdag, and one of them could be whichever center forward's not hurt / not suspended right now, Carranza. Just a thought.
Yeah, I was going to go ahead and say a lot of great opinions there, a lot of great thoughts. I guess the last thing that I'll end on, and I want to ask Kyle this on Monday, but we just ran out of way too much time. And so my question to you guys is, does it bother you with the lack of coverage that the Union get from everybody at MLSsoccer.com, where, you see them talking about Nashville, they talk about New York City, but it seems like at the end of the day, whenever they're on their podcast and everything, they spend 30 seconds to a minute talking about the Union, and then they move on to the next team. I feel like, teams know how the Union are going to play. Teams know what the Union are. But I feel like from a league, like we don't see them in commercials. We don't see them advertised. Like it's always, oh, your LA teams, you're into Miami because it's Miami, New York City, but it's nothing with the Union. And, you know, Jim Curtin always talks about, yeah, we enjoy being the underdogs, but I feel like teams don't think that, okay, we got to play down to the Union because they know that the Union are going to be a good team. But I feel like the league as a whole, I feel like they're still not painting the Union as we all think of the Union being one of the best teams in the league.
I think it comes down to the fact that it's just not a very sexy team. It's not a very sexy city, which is weird because it's the fifth largest city in the country. It's just, you play in Chester. You play a 4-4-2. You're basically the Red Bulls, but you have none of the stars the Red Bulls had back in the day. You and I bring this up like weekly after like extra time goes up. I group chat, I'll tweet about it. Like certain people on extra time, Charlie Davies, just seems to think Daniel Gazda's not a really good player and just doesn't care that he's like third in the league in goals as a attacking midfielder on a team that's had nothing with striker-wise going on this season, outside of like, you know, Carranza's, you know, effort and occasional goals, right? And it's just like it's down to that. You're not gonna like put the Philadelphia Flyers of the 70s on prime time every night, you know? You're not gonna put the I'm trying to come up with other examples, and it's not going well. But, you know, it's just like, yeah, everybody knows the Union are good, but they're not fun to talk about. And, you know, it's nice to have, like, there's not even, like, the Union don't even have drama, you know? There's not even, like, one player his other player's wife or something. There's nothing going on with this team. They're all friends. You know, that's how they all got COVID. They were all best friends. That's how you lost the whole team. I don't know if you watched the best friends video they put out on Twitter today, but they're all just like, oh, yeah, we're pretty cool. Andre's like, every single player on the team is my best friend, which, you know, it's not a fun team to talk about unless you're us.
Yeah, and to that point, Ricky, I had to, me and another guy who's been on the podcast, Harry, both, we were talking about extra time, and we had to stop listening because it was the Seattle, LA teams, and maybe a couple other, Daryl DK, like podcast it was becoming. And those guys are the writers that do the MLS. And we don't have the big names, and we're not in the cities that they want to produce. For goodness sakes, they did one of the power rankings. They had Seattle as number one because they made it to the CONCACAF Champions League final. That's great. They did a great accomplishment winning it. That's the MLS power rankings. That's not the CONCACAF power rankings. And if it was the Union or other teams, I don't think they would have been in that same position. Seattle struggling because of what they sacrificed to win that finals, and that's fine. But there's certain teams that get more leverage in the media than we do, and to be fair, there's other teams that are just with us. Like I think I can count on one hand how many times I heard them talk about like a Vancouver or an FC Dallas or teams like that. And even if they were winning more, I don't even know if that would matter. There's just certain teams that they focus on, win or lose, and then just ignore the others.
Well, it's a certain thing. Like, it's a ratings thing. Like, everybody knows there's more Seattle fans, there's more LA fans. So everybody, like, we're going to talk about them more, because if we don't talk about them, then certain people are going to stop listening. But you get the same thing with Philly fans. There's just less of us. And it comes down to the fact that, like, we should be a big market team, but we're not because of who owns us, right? We should be one of the top 5 teams in the league, regardless when it comes to money, but we're not. And we're probably not going to be that unless we're sold one day, you know, which is probably the end goal. And I think we all at a certain point, you have to realize, like, the end goal for him was probably, oh, we're going to sell this one day. And it's just to the point where it's like, it's worth way more than he ever imagined it would be. And, like, I think at a certain point, he'll still probably be our owner, but he'll sell the team to somebody else who is the real owner, and he's just the guy, you know, that everybody is aware of, which happens with a lot of teams like that, where, like, you think of certain NFL teams, who you think of the owner is not really the owner. They're just the face of the team. And I think, like, we sit here and we talk about this, and I get mad every week at Charlie Davies. But then the other thing is, I was just listening to Total Soccer Show this week. David Goss was on today's episode, and at the end of the episode, they're just talking about American players, like who is going to be on the roster for the World Cup, right? And at the end, it's just like, oh, who is not going to be on the roster for the World Cup, but you should think about. And Goss is just throwing out names. And at the end, he just goes, and Leon Flock, because, like, he doesn't really have the final product, but he's the sort of player that, like, if we didn't have Kellen Acosta as the backup center defensive midfielder for the national team, we'd all be like, oh, what are we going to do here? And in that sort of system, Leon Flock would work a lot better. But he was just basically, and he'll do this on a lot of episodes because he's the guy that just talks about young players, and he's just like, oh, like, so-and-so did this thing and so-and-so did that thing. And he was just really excited to talk about Leon Flock at the end of this episode. And it was just, like, refreshing, you know?
Yeah, but I personally, I'd rather him not speak about it at all then, because Leon Flock is nowhere near ready for the U.S.
That wasn't really the point. It was
I know what you're saying, but it's then it gets like, and I think your point earlier, like when you talk about like Charlie Davies, these guys don't watch these teams in and out, right?
I think the more annoying thing is, like, Charlie Davies was here. Charlie Davies has inside information, and he's talked about Jim before in a, like,
but Charlie Davies was here for a cup of coffee. He does an actual broadcast now. He's not focused on MLS, so
he's a New England guy.
Yeah, and he doesn't understand what Gazdag's role is because he doesn't watch Gazdag week in and week out. So if you take Gazdag's stats and compare him against every other quote-unquote 10 in the league, Gazdag looks like a mess besides the goals, right? On the stats page, which is what these guys are getting handed. We know what he's doing because we live this shit, right? Like every week, on bated breath. So we know the tactics that are involved with the play and why certain stats, you know, or certain metrics don't reflect like they traditionally should. So I don't know. Those guys, I take them with a grain of salt. I'm happy when they're on national TV. People can see the Union play. To Rich's point earlier, it's a tense way to root for a team because we cede so much possession. But from a neutral standpoint, it's got to be fun as hell to watch a Union game, right? We've got really pretty uniforms. We get up and down the field. We're direct. I think Blake makes highlight saves. I think we're fun to watch. I do, if we're not, you know, so involved.
Also, you know, the league stuff. There's much better non-league stuff out there to listen to and to read. I don't even really tune into them anymore. Just look around a little bit. You can find plenty of better content. And if you need Union specific stuff, you know, there's 8 different Union podcasts with different takes. And then for a national view, there's much better national view takes out there too.
I think the thing is, like, there's certain, like, the only thing about, like, Extra Time's one of those shows where, like, you got 5 people, you never know which three are gonna, like, actually gonna be there, and, like, 2 of them are fucking, sorry, Todd, 2 of them are terrible. Like, every time Charlie Davies talks, I'm like, I want to kill myself right now. Sorry, Todd, I did it twice in, like, 3 minutes.
Extra Time in MLS soccer, I feel, is much more for the introductory MLS fan, and then you find your way over to the deeper stuff.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is just, like, now that MLS Assist doesn't exist anymore, I can't just listen to Joe Lowry talk about the Union like every other week anymore, so it's upsetting. Because, like, of all the national writers, you know, he's the tactics guy, and he just like goes in on stuff. And you're just like, oh yeah, nice to know that you're like actually paying attention.
I don't know. It's kind of weird to me that, you get MLS's official pages doing power rankings and everything. It's like, for crying out loud, like, you're supposed to be a professional league and everything. You don't see the Premier League doing power rankings. You don't see the Bundesliga. And then you got, like, I mean, I guess there's nothing wrong with there are people that work for the league doing podcasts and everything. But I don't know. For me, like, it's a weird look, in my opinion, just like them doing their podcasts, the power rankings, posting as the official page of the league and everything. I don't know. You get people from Europe and everything that look at that. They're like, oh, it's cringe and everything. And I mean, obviously they're going to complain about it because it's American soccer regardless. But I don't know. Just every time that they do power rankings, every time that they do the podcast as the official league podcast and everything, I don't know. I think it's kind of weird.
It's a holdover. And I mean, maybe to some extent it's still needed, but it's a holdover from a time where they literally had zero coverage outside of maybe 2 to 3 blogs, right? Like Soccer by Ivis and, a few other things. And then a bunch of people talking on big soccer forums, right? So, I mean, they started the coverage like that out of necessity because there literally wasn't any other coverage. And not to say the non-league coverage is that expansive anymore, which is probably why they're still doing it. But yeah, I mean, it's becoming increasingly outdated and unnecessary, which is a good thing, right? That speaks to the progress of the league.
For sure. I agree with you. And I'm sure, other fans around MLS feel the same way, but MLS has come a long way. And like you talked about, Mike, earlier, I mean, 12 years ago, you look from what MLS was to what it is now. I mean, I saw reports today that Ronny Deila was being interviewed for coaching jobs in the championship. And, we've always talked about MLS wanting to progress and sell players, become a selling league. And you look what New England did, sold 3 players in the last year and a half for $27 million, I think it is. And, the Union selling Brendan Aronson, FC Dallas selling all their homegrowns and everything. And, I think, yeah, you want to continue to see players, European players come here, homegrown players come over here and get sold to Europe. But I think the next step for MLS is, giving these coaches chances that are first-time coaches in the league, coaches that are coming from overseas that, weren't in the top 5 leagues, come and establish themselves like some of these younger players from these leagues are coming over to MLS and then getting a chance over in Europe. I think at the end of the day, all this stuff is just making MLS that much better.
Agreed. If there was something I could buy a stock on, it would be the MLS. I think it just continues to keep growing as a product, and I'm happy to continue to see it grow.
That's basically what Kevin Durant did. Bought a stock in the Union.
I wish I had his money too.
Thank you for all of you guys for participating tonight. Much better doing this, I feel like, at 8:30 than I did my last one at 7 o'clock. Dan, Rich, both Mikes, Mike Van Zandt, Mike Thomas, Ed, Doc from Philly 17. That was cool, right? Philly 17, the TV providers for the Union, wanting to learn more about the Union. We always complain about the Union not getting enough coverage in the city. And look, we got somebody from Philly 17 wanting to learn more about the Union. So all you guys that participated tonight, I really, really appreciate that. And for you guys not following the social media pages on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, follow at Free Kick Pod, wherever you get your podcasts, The Free Kick. And again, just everybody that participated tonight, I'll leave all their Twitter handles in the show description. But any final words from anybody?
I got one thing. I have to put EA on blast. Team of the season. We're talking about national MLS people leaving the Union out of coverage. EA's leaving the Union out. No Union players in team of the season. Blunder of the week. EA Sports. You blew it with the Union and the MLS. I'm still going to buy all the MLS players, but I'm not going to have as much fun with it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ed. It's a joke. EA sucks, but we'll stick with FIFA for another year, and once EA becomes EA Football in the following year, we'll see how much better it gets. I don't have high hopes, though. Rich, I think you unmuted your mic and we're going to say something.
I was just going to say, yeah, well, no one likes us and we don't care.
Well, that's the best way to end this podcast. So I will go ahead and see you guys hopefully next week with somebody from the Cincinnati commentary team. But if not, then we'll see what we'll do for an episode next week. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.